In the module on contextual, structural and linguistic annotation, you have learnt about information you can add to texts to make the analysis of corpora more efficient. You have also learned how annotation is added to texts and corpora using encoding standards which make the annotation interoperable. This means that different applications will understand it if it is added in these formats. Thanks to annotation, you can answer more complex questions concerning features of texts than you would if you had access to the plain texts only. In this lesson, I will show you how this is done. Of course, what you see here are just examples. Much more can be done with a properly annotated corpus, depending on your research question and the functionalities of the platform you use. We start with contextual annotation, which, as you will remember, can also be referred to as metadata. Metadata apply to whole texts, recording contextual features which may be relevant in their interpretation, such as the date of publication, the genre it belongs to, and its author. In this example, we create subcorporal texts written in English by a specific group of authors. For exemplification purposes, we use the intercorp core corpus, a richly annotated multilingual and parallel corpus of fiction texts. The intercorp corpus can be accessed online through the context interface, which allows you to perform very complex searches of both individual subcorpora and their parallel versions, where translations are aligned to their source texts. Here, we shall use the English subcorpus only. Specifically, we first restrict the search to the core intercorp corpus and then further restrict the search to a set of English authors whom we identify thanks to the values of two attributes of the element text. The first attribute is the src_lang attribute. src_lang stands for source language. The second attribute is author. After identifying the attributes, we need to identify the values of these attributes. The value of the first attribute is English, while the value of the second attribute is the actual name of the author we wish to include, for instance, Ackroyd Peter. Here, I'm going to compare the frequency of he and she, with both small and capital initial, in a subset of texts by 5 female authors of contemporary literary fiction to the frequency of the same words in the remainder of the corpus. The authors in the first subcorpus are Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Margaret Atwood, Alice Munro, Alice Smith, and Zadie Smith. While one may expect that books by these authors feature more female characters than average, the extent of the difference is not easy to gauge intuitively. Pause the video now and make a hypothesis of the proportion of he and she in a subcorpus of text by these authors versus a subcorpus of general fiction. Then resume watching to find out if your hypothesis is confirmed. This table shows you the number of times per million words that he and she appear in the female author corpus versus the rest of the intercorp core corpus, which we use as reference. The frequency is reported in this way, standardized per million words, to make the numbers comparable. Since one subcorpus is much bigger than the other, the raw frequencies are not directly comparable. Therefore, standardization is needed. This comparison, in fact, suggests that references to male characters in general fiction and fiction by the 5 female writers are comparable in numbers and more or less in line with the number of times these female authors mention female characters. The odd one out is the much lower frequency of references to female characters in the reference corpus, the bottom right cell. The standardized frequency of the pronoun she in this corpus is half that of he in both the reference corpus and the female author corpus. While this is only a very simplified comparison, it does suggest 2 generalizations we could use as starting points for further investigations. In the largely male-dominated reference corpus, female characters are severely underrepresented, while no such underrepresentation of male characters seems to occur in the female writers' subcorpus. Next, we consider structural annotation, which, as you will remember, encodes information about the text's internal organization, such as titles, paragraphs and sentences in written texts, and terns in spoken discourse. For this example, we consult the Unite corpus. This is a corpus of interactions in writing between learners of English and chatbots. We're interested in the learner's production and therefore would like to only search student terns, excluding chatbot terns. To allow us to only search student terns, the corpus creators added information about where a tern starts, where it ends, and who performs it, whether a student or a chatbot. In this slide, you can see how this information is encoded in the corpus in XML. We wish to describe the ways in which learners in the corpus use the word like, which, as you certainly know, has many uses in English, particularly in informal English. We perform a case-insensitive query for the word like and further specify that the query should only apply to student terns, leaving out chatbot terns. We obtained several hundred hits, a sample of which is shown on this slide. We can now categorize these occurrences of like in terms of the function the word plays. There are many cases where like is used in its main sense of expressing a preference or a polite request, as in, I like doing sports, or I'd like to make some friends. These are the uses which would immediately come to mind when one asks how the word like is used in English. But can you think of any other uses? We're going to show you two such uses, but take a moment and try to think of other ways in which you use like in informal English. You can pause the video now if you like. One use is as an approximative discourse marker, when you would like to signal that what you're about to say is not very precise. As an example, consider, I find it like a new world for me. Another one is the so-called quotative like that you use to introduce direct speech, as in, she was like, no way. Let us take this last use of like to exemplify the importance of linguistic annotation. As you know, linguistic annotation is used to add interpretative information about language constituents to specific words. To try and single out quotative uses of like from the almost 1,000 occurrences of like, we may refine our initial query using linguistic annotation. We first need to consider which structure this use of like is most likely to be found in. Take a few seconds now to consider this problem. One possibility would be to look for words which are likely to function as subjects, such as proper nouns and pronouns, followed by the lemma be, followed by the word like, and a quotation. Now, since we cannot rely on quoting devices like inverted commas in informal language, we're going to query the corpus looking for the first part of the structure, up to the word like. In corpus query language, as used on the Sketch Engine and no Sketch Engine platforms, this query would look more or less as you see on the screen now. This syntax is used to retrieve tokens tagged as personal pronouns or proper nouns, followed by any form of the lemma be, followed by the word like. If you like, you can pause the video now and make sure that you understand what each part means. This query returns 11 results out of the almost 1,000 occurrences of like we originally found in terns by students. But when we read the concordances, none in fact function as quotatives, while some function as approximatives. Can you locate 3 approximative uses in the concordance? Once again, stop the video now if you would like to analyze the concordances at your own pace. Some examples are highlighted on this slide. How many of them were you able to spot? So, the take-home messages for this lesson. Annotation provides extra information, allowing you to refine your corpus queries. Contextual annotation applies to whole texts. structural annotation to stretches of texts, and linguistic annotation to single items, typically words.